Good morning, everybody. It's gone 9 o'clock, and so I declare the meeting open. Has anyone got any apologies? I don't have any, so I'll take that as none. Fine. Confirmation of the agenda. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Paul. All in favour say aye. Carried. Thank you. Disclosure or update of interests for committee members. Do we have any? No. Matters arising from the, sorry, did we? Matters arising from the previous meeting minutes. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes of the open part of the RAC meeting on the 14th of June? Not, can I have a mover and seconder that they are a true and correct record? Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Pamela. All those in favour say aye. Carried. Moving on to the risk management activity update report. Chris, why don't you join us at the table? I think you're going to have plenty to say. So who's going to speak on this?
Yes, so Mr. Chair, perhaps if rather than the way the information is necessarily presented in the report, but maybe if we start with the discussion in terms of the current or emerging risks. Obviously there's content in the report, but Chris as Chief Executive, I think this is the opportunity for the committee to hear from him in terms of things that are keeping him awake at night. So hopefully he's pulled his breath, ready to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and councillors. Yeah, so the things that are on my mind in terms of those the current and emerging risks, several of them we've probably talked about before. We still have a major reform program coming at us around the corner, which has still got some quite big unknowns in it and what that means for us going forward. So one of those is the future for local government. The review panel is going to put out their second report to the government in October, in late October. And so we're waiting for that. And we've also got the resource management reforms where the Minister is signalling not only what the new bill will look like for the Natural Built Environment Act and the Spatial Planning Act, but they're also going to be talking about the new entities that are going to be set up for governance around it. And some of what we've heard is going to have quite an impact on the ability of this council and other local government to arrange themselves and with iwi and others to do that. So it's what that looks like around the corner and how that's going to work. At the same time as we're getting other legislation of the likes of the Essential Freshwater Program, regulations are still about to pop out any day. There's the recruitment and retention that we've talked about in the past. That is still significant, and it's still significant for some parts of the business. You know, the likes of policy and planners and the likes of in some of the regulatory space, it is very difficult to recruit. It's not how much you pay, it's actually just the number of people in the country, internationally, who you can actually even try and attract to do the roles. But I am pleased to say that in some parts of the business, we are starting to recruit some good people in some of the key roles where we have been struggling, and and we are starting to get some of our vacancies filled with. There's been some long-standing ones, so that's I feel a little bit less pressure there. We still have that high and uncertain inflationary environment and quite confusing signals from different commentators about whether that's peaked and it's coming down or it's under control versus, what goes on in the world. I guess that, you just hear about another lockdown in China in a major city, and you start to think, oh, what does that mean for supply chain logistics and just that uncertainty around it. And for some of our planning going forward, as we're starting to think, what does that mean? So that's still on our mind. Clearly the new council is something that we need to have a look at. We've got quite a big work program going forward with these, as I said, the major reform programs, and we'll have some people coming in who we don't know what their ideology is or what their interests are, what else they might be wanting this council to do in seeking their candidacy for this council. So there's the unknown, as you always have every start of a new triennium, around what the new council might be interested in changing or wanting to add into the mix of what we do. I think pleasing to say some of those key projects in council, it's good to see some of those pressure points perhaps being addressed and to go forward to try and ensure those are going to be successful. I know that's on the agenda later today. Climate change will be the last one, I'd say. There's still a lot happening in that space. There's a lot of interest. In fact, I had a discussion with the Climate Change Commissioner, Rod Carr, just in the last week or so, and just trying to think, what would his advice be for the role of regional councils? And we position very clearly in the adaptation space. Was a little bit cautious about where we play in the emission reduction space. And for me, with our region's profile, which has that big agriculture emission footprint, the ability for us to set targets to get reductions versus what's the responsibility of the government and what they're doing through the emission trading system or through Hawaka Ekanoa type approaches, which is yet to be seen and finalised. But they're the things probably most on my mind, Mr. Chair. And a lot of that is addressed in the report as well.
Thank you. Have anything else you want to say? Or?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. In terms of those emerging risks, I think Chris has covered off the points in the report, plus other things that are taking his time. I guess the rest of the report really is around the risk management activity and the deep dives that have been undertaken in this quarter, with reporting back on those. Across two of the areas, I guess the pre-control risk for two of those, so people, capability and culture and information technology, the risk rating has increased, but with additional controls and mitigations being identified, which has meant that the post-control risk rating has remained the same. A lot of information that the team pulled together in terms of the feedback that's received from the organisation through those deep dives. So probably just happy to take questions from the committee around any of those.
Okay. My suggestion with any questions on the IT deep dive is that we leave that to the PX. Oh, just
sorry.
hang on. Okay. I was just going to say the IT part I would like to leave until the PX session, because I think we get into trouble a bit as to what should be discussed in open agenda and what shouldn't. So if the committee's in agreement with that, yes, any questions from committee members? Andrew.
Of the 5 risks you've just laid out, you haven't identified culture as a risk, so I'm assuming that you're pretty happy with how the culture of this organisation is tracking and the net promoter scores, etc. No worries in your mind about our corporate culture?
So organisation culture? No, the biggest concerns I might have had is the culture that had been the tone from the top around the governance in the past, but I think maybe some of those issues have been addressed, and we need to address them with a new council coming in, and because that helps set the organisation culture, and some of the things that have gone that's been played out in the last couple of years. But certainly in terms of staff culture, I think it's been well reported that we did a culture survey with staff, and we got some very good feedback from that. I was very pleased with the organisation culture where it was, but staff also identified a couple of areas where they felt that we could make improvements, and so we're working on that. In terms of the customer experience that people are interacting with us, look, I think we're working pretty hard. We track pretty well of an NPS in the mid-40s. There's one or two pockets of the organisation at various times of the year where that drops down, and we're trying to deal with that. In my KPIs for next year, we've got in there, and I put up a review of all the channels where we operate with customers, be it from those who interact online, on the phone, face-to-face, other mechanisms. We're reviewing that, and we're looking at potentially transforming that once we have that information, how we interact to improve it even further.
And the second question was around climate change. Not sure whether you've read the Climate Action Committee's paper for this week.
The agenda?
Yeah.
No, I'm not fully across it, but I will be by tomorrow.
It's sort of, we run the risk of fiddling with the economic engine of the Waikato. And there's some reasonably scary language in that agenda, my opinion. And I think there is a risk that we will have a part of the council heading off down a path where they're going to be having conversations and there will be language around the use of resources, for example, peat swamps, where they might get a little bit disjointed from the main body of the council. So I'm interested in, do you perceive under number 5 on your list of things that's keeping you awake at night, do you perceive that there is a risk that this organisation may get a little bit ahead of itself in terms of trying to drive some changes that will strand capital, damage businesses that have been around the Waikato for a very long while? So where do you put all of that in your thinking, especially with a new council coming in, because who knows where they're going to come from, because they could be rabid greenies, in which case it's game on, and I'd be really concerned about that.
Without preempting who's going to get on and what they would do, look, I think that staff, we want to try and have a measured and appropriate response to the issues. As I said, discussion with the Climate Change Commissioner, should we be putting very ambitious emission reduction targets in our policy? His view was probably not. But the feeling I got from him, our space is more in the adaptation space, which is where the government is actually putting legislation in place, which might dictate what and how we should do. But I do think there are issues we need to address. You gave the example of the peat soils, and I say the peat soils as opposed to the peat swamps, which haven't been developed yet. There's significant land use and future flood management, drainage issues in those that we need to address anyway. I don't know what the response is, but I think we need to take a well-informed and measured response to it. And I feel like our strategic infrastructure, sustainable strategic infrastructure framework that we're developing will help guide us on that line, as opposed to having knee-jerk responses. So I hope that we'd have good, informed, information-led discussion around it going forward.
Any other questions? No? So can we have a mover and seconder for the resolution to receive the risk management activity. I'm proposing,
Any risk of any reboot conversation.
well,
You're saying?
I'm saying that I think the whole IT area, we've already got an agenda item for PX, and so I'm going to propose that we discuss, save all our questions for that area until we get into PX.
If I can support that, because there's two elements of that. One is there's the reboot, but secondly, as soon as we get into IT, we start getting into cyber, and that's specifically in. So I just think it'd be, we'd have half a discussion, then we'd all get frustrated. So I support
Yes.
what you're saying.
Thank you, Paul.
Is that the? Have I done the right thing?
Yes, spot on. Harry,
Apologies for lateness, Chair.
no problem.
I'd like to speak to page 18. I presume that's where we're at, the risk register. So page 18 and also page 21. I've got a concern that we look at, let's go through, I'll go straight to page 21 if I may. What I'm concerned about is when we have a look at the information technology, in other words, the tech, the IT side, there is a lot of change in terms of the risk landscape in IT. So when you look at, it's got their short-term, thanks, Dave. When you look at short-term 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 and 5 to 10, it's saying the risk is the same all the way through. Yet the risk profile, the risk landscape is ever evolving in IT. So what happens is you can't predict out into the future, particularly in that longer 5 to 10 year period. You cannot predict that your controls that you have now are going to be adequate. So in terms of what controls we have now and what controls we have going forward, and what reflects that is it doesn't line up when you've got a risk rating which is critical, which shows on page 21 of the risk rating pre-controls, and then you have a high which is basically post-controls, and then you talk about the timescale thereon going to the future only being medium. So from that context, when we look at and I actually agree with going to critical, I think it's absolutely appropriate, but it does not give any evidence to the fact that controls will need to change over time. And so I would like to see those, particularly in the 3 to 5 and 5 to 10 year period, they should at least come up higher than the medium, because it's an evolving process in terms of those controls. And I can go into that a little more, particularly around some of the other later points that we come up later in the report. So that's my first, and then I'd like to just speak to page 30, which is on information technology, if we can cover that as well later, is it? Or is it now?
What I want to do is leave all the IT discussion until we do it under PX, because I think wind up with a rather artificial.
Okay, so the whole lot's moving to there. I'm happy with that. Thank you very much.
Right. No other questions? So could I have a mover and seconder for the resolution, please? All, thank you. Thank you, Pamela. All those in favour say aye. Carried. Thank you. Moving on now to the internal audit activity. Who's going to?
That will be me.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
they generally tend to stay for the whole meeting. But we can invite them expressly if you would like.
Expressly like them to be here.
Okay.
Conversations that might possibly on.
Right, we can arrange that. Janine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this provides an update in terms of the existing internal audit plan that has been signed off by this committee, noting that the reviews that have been planned, as noted under section 3 of the report, have been somewhat delayed as the contract with KPMG has been worked through CoLab. That is now in place. So these reviews will be scheduled, so we'll work through timing of that. As has been noted, there's further information in the public excluded section of the report with regard to cyber security, and so we can pick that conversation up there. A key component of this report was bringing back the legislative compliance review that the committee received last time from KPMG, with the report appended again to the staff report. And what the team have done is to pull together, in essence, a high-level work program that's proposed to respond to the key matters that have been identified through that compliance review. So that's set out in the diagram in figure 1, and then some further breakdown of those work activities on page 82 of the agenda. We also just provide an update in terms of the previous reviews that have been done. So in terms of the Safe Plus review, noting that 64 recommendations had been made and 62 of those have been implemented at the time of this report. And then in relation to procurement and contract management, 12 of the 12 recommendations made, there are 3 that are still ongoing, but progress being made on those. So happy to take questions from committee members.
Any questions? Barry.
Yes. First of all, I want to applaud the page 51 legislative compliance review program and the dates. I think that's very wise and absolutely appropriate. My comments on the KPMG report are on page 55. I found the key areas for improvement. What it said to me is there was really, if you see the things that staff survey respondents agreed and disagreed with, and you go down those numbers, you get a really confused picture. So staff on one hand saying one thing and then saying something else, and you really pick up a sense of, I'm not really quite sure. So what I'm saying is thank you for that report, and thank you to staff for that program timeline, that review. I think that's going to pin it down. So good report and good actions to solve. So that's my view. Thank you.
I had a comment on page 57. I'd seen another one of these assessments done by another Big Four firm, and I was concerned at the target states that they were suggesting that WRC should aspire to, because this other firm was recommending that 3 was good enough. And I think we do need to bear in mind that we don't necessarily want to have perfect, and we need to balance cost against the controls that we would achieve. And so I think we just need to be very careful that we make sure that the target states that we're aiming for are appropriate. And I'm sure that can be factored into things.
So in light of that, if you take the number 1 there, governance and culture, where would your target state be for this organisation?
I think that's an
outstanding question,
a difficult,
albeit leading.
No, I'm not offering a individual rating factors, but an overall assessment. I think, from what I see in the sector, that this council compares very favourably what I'm seeing elsewhere. I think, as a general rule, the maturity in the local government sector is very low, and I think we saw that being really reported by the OAG when they did follow-up look at risk management practices from the earlier one a few years ago, and really didn't notice much improvement. And so I think when I look at WRC, I think it's generally performing favourably in comparison with the rest of the sector that I'm familiar with.
Yeah, well,
Now, that doesn't answer your question.
no, it doesn't. And the reason I bring it up is because there's an opportunity for us to send a message to that joker down there on what we think good looks like. And I think comparing us to the rest of local government in New Zealand, I think for the reasons you've just outlined, that's a flawed logic. I think we've got a great organisation compared with the rest of the people that are in the field, but I think there should be some creative tension here with the chief executive and his team. And the three areas I would pick on would be governance and culture. And I think we should say, as a team, this council and you and your executive team want to be optimised in terms of governance and culture. And I think the other one that I would pick on is training and comms, for the reasons the chief executive's just outlined, to be a desirable place to come and work. We're going to have to build a reputation. So I think being optimised for training and comms. And the other one is that I would pick would be reporting. And I think we're really good at it. Don't get me wrong, Chair. We're in great shape. But this is a chance for us to set some aspirational goals. What's the first speech the British Prime Minister's given today? What did she say? We want to be an aspirational nation. You know, I think there's a chance for us as an Audit and Risk Committee to say to the Chief Executive, feel free to optimise. You know, if you can turn up with an optimised score for one of these next time we do this report, I think that would be cause for celebration, Chris. I really do. That's the point I'd make.
I take your points, but as I said, I only see the governance as it relates to audit and risk committees, and I think this committee compares very favourably. No, I'm not saying that, because I think there's always room for improvement. I think risk is a constantly evolving environment, and you can't just rest on your laurels. But I think we do a pretty good job in this council of in its efforts in the reporting of risk to this committee, the managing of risk, the effort that goes in by the committee and the staff, I think is very, very good. So and you don't just get there overnight. David, would you have a comment?
Just chipping in, if you don't mind. I quite agree with you. Certainly, over a period of time, my involvement with audit and risk committees around the place, CCOs and local governments, definitely this council, in my view, has one of the, they're up in the top 25%. I mean, I obviously don't go to them all, but, certainly needs to be congratulated. A couple of years ago, Andrew, who's now left the OAG, so happy to mention her, reckoned that, confirmed also that this is one of the better audit and risk committees. So just sharing that from a outside in the sector perspective.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, just, Andrew, these headings are only for compliance. It's not for the whole organisation. So I agree with you on that the whole organisation, governance and culture should be up at the high level. But when it comes to compliance, compliance is only one part of behaviour. And the modern view is to have integrated systems or integrated thinking. So if we have a quality management system, we've got a person doing a job and they will think about quality, they will think about safety, they will think about the environment if it affects the environment, they will think about compliance and make sure they're not breaking the law. So this is still one person doing one job. And so the modern approach is to have an integrated approach. I think the plan we've got to raise to, one, get clarity on the strategic compliance issues, and two, then get some communication around compliance is good. But the thing that drives all of those behaviours is engagement. So the real goal is engagement, and then we can do some training on compliance that people are going to follow because they're engaged. So yeah, that's the bit that we should probably come back and revisit is the thing which underpins all forms of risk management, but a big chunk of it. But no, so with compliance, and if we're a bank, I'd be up at the top. And there will be elements, if we then break this picture down into subsets, there will be pieces where I think we need to be in the optimised. So there'll be some core functionality that we can't get wrong. Right? And we have independent audit of our BCA because the BCA has to be right? And there'll be bits where I think we will go for optimised, Andrew, because that's sort of our core business. But general compliance, it has to be appropriate for who we are. But I don't think it has to be over the top. And the culture will drive compliance, like it drives fraud, like it drives safety, like it drives quality. Culture's going to drive the whole lot. So yeah, so I think you could do subsets of this and maybe have slightly different outcomes. But generally, yeah, this is pretty good. Mm-hmm. And they can get a bit better, and it will because there's a plan to. I'm kind of happy with the travel.
I'm not saying it's not good. I'm saying there's an opportunity for us.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I think it's a really interesting discussion, and that whole idea of what's aspiration versus what's focused on actual and making progress. It's a good discussion to have, because the reality is you've got to land somewhere. If you set your sights too high, you don't focus on the actual work you're doing to actually make those incremental achievements. That's where the focus should be. But if you set the sights too low, you'll only achieve what you put in place at best. I think it's appropriate. Certainly, the executive, we take this very seriously. Even as recent as yesterday, we had a discussion around aspects of compliance where we regulate ourselves, and do we do enough? Are staff aware of the need to comply in this sort of situation? The conversations are being had and the discussions are being had. I think where one of the real opportunities are, and it's something that Neville's trying to focus part of the business in, is through some of the measurement and reporting, so we know where we are, and that we can see it and we can track the progress and we get the lead indicators and not just okay, this is what comply was showed us. How do we know we're tracking towards it without having to have know what happened some time ago? In terms of comply with, it is a piece of software that the organisation's using. I think we're maturing in our way in which we're using it, and I think that there's often people wonder, does that relate to me, or should I be passing it on to someone else? And as I think we work through and better understand who's responsible for responding to the questions, at what level of the organisation, and yes, that training about people understanding what does apply to them and what it means, I think we will improve. But I think that's a really great discussion about where we set the target, where we're going to try and achieve and over what time frame, because I do think we are moving in that direction.
Thank you. If there are no more questions.
Well, yeah, I mean, my observation would be this: if this is about compliance, what that means to me is, as a regulator, we set and train some processes, and we comply with them. And I think to myself, I'm making myself, I guess, reasonably unpopular in parts of this organisation because I've got a situation in my rohi where every time it rains, heavy rain, I've got to see a stream contaminating one of the rivers. And we've got a resource consent issued to a TA. We've abated a TA. We've smacked a TA's hands. And for 18 months, I've had to ride over a stream that every time it rains, I've got to see that stream contaminating a river. So that doesn't feel like we're complying with our own rules, you know. So this is why I want us to be a little bit more aspirational in terms of compliance, because when we don't comply or when we have things in place where we're going to take a lot of time to fix a problem, what does that say to people? So I might have completely the wrong end of this stick. There'd be nothing unusual about that, but I just feel that if we're talking about a governance and compliance, a governance and culture view of the world as it relates to compliance, then I'd like to send the Chief Executive a message that I think we can do better and we should be optimised. We might be best in class, but we can still be better. I think that's the point I'm trying to make, Chair.
If I could just make another comment through, Mr. Chair. I think at the end of that report, it indicates the different types of legislation that we need to assess compliance against. And it's quite an extensive list. I did start counting it yesterday. I don't think I got to the end, but it must be around at least 80 different pieces of legislation that we're talking about. And there's, so we have a lot in place in the organisation. And I think it's about having that purview of compliance as opposed to just specific areas, but being able to identify where we're weakest and where we can improve.
And I think through you, Mr. Chair, one of the first steps in terms of the action plan is a prioritisation, I guess, on a risk-based approach around what are those key pieces of legislation that we really want to focus in around compliance. So that is the very first thing that we need to do. The other element is around education of staff, but I think if we can anchor it again against those key pieces of legislation, rather than trying to be all things to all people, maybe the rest of it actually comes through the points that Paul was making around culture in terms of understanding what is the right thing to do, and it's just embedded through those quality management systems.
Harry.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at page 68, the key highlights of the current state, one of the things that really resonated and was an insight that my thinking aligns with is that point number 5, and this potential for comply with responses to be a tick box activity rather than fostering active management. So then you flip over to the other side, and I think it's well worth the ELT to focus on those action points, in particular 3, that seek to explore below the hood so that it isn't just a tick box exercise. And I think that will give, I like comply with, as long as it's really being driven in the right way. So it's an effective tool. It just needs to make sure we're looking below the hood all the time. But thank you for that.
Okay. If we have no further questions, can we have a mover and seconder for the receiving? Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Barry. All those in favour say aye. Carried. Thank you. So we move on to item 7, the key projects activity update. And I think all the committee members, except Paul, were present in that meeting earlier this week where we discussed these. But I think we should take the report as read, but are there any questions arising out of what's been reported that members want to raise at this time? I'm going to take the whole IT discussion into PXS.
So the question you're asking
But
is,
project reboot,
are there any
projects
comments in here
on the
that you
project.
want to make, as long as they're not about reboot? That's the question you're asking.
Effectively.
But through you, Mr. Chair, the project status report for reboot is open, which we could.
Well, yes.
I guess it depends on what the questions are.
Yeah.
Chair, can I ask, has there been anything happening since the reports were written that can update us on anything to do with status at the moment, right to this point? Thank you.
Specifically in terms of reboot.
In terms of overall.
Okay, so we might just do a very once over lightly for each of the projects that are reported, which will give.
With all due respect, we had a really fulsome discussion earlier in the week. Please, let's not go over that again.
I don't want to go, Chair. Is there anything new? The answer might be no. It's the same as what.
Well, I would doubt there's anything new. We only met on Monday, which is 2 days ago. We met in the afternoon on Monday. It is really only Tuesday where anything could have happened. But can we just maybe ask the question in the areas that is covered by this report, has there been anything that's come to light since our meeting on Monday? Yeah, I think we'll just work through. Greg, can you comment on whether there's anything that's happened since we met as a key projects committee on Monday that this committee should be aware of?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, nothing substantive. I did signal to the reference group on Monday around our variation being declined, and so the focus of staff now is to look at what options are most appropriate going forward.
Thank you. Janine, can you comment on anything that's happened since Monday in terms of reboot?
Through you, Mr. Chair, probably the activity that's happening is just continued engagement with Deloitte around the additional governance support and the form that will take, but there are no issues bubbling up from a project delivery perspective.
Given that you are meeting daily with this, is there anything happened since that last meeting? Because I understand we were on track.
Yeah. So the status as of yesterday, when the PSG met, was that we remained on the critical path.
Okay. Fine. And is there anyone that can comment on the? Tracy.
Yeah, good morning, Chair. There's no updates in the policy program since Monday afternoon.
Right. So,
Yes, I had a question on the coastal policy program. It seems to me that there's two challenges here. The first challenge is getting people who have the policy qualification, getting fully staffed, and so actually running the program. Secondly is the whole question of consulting with mana whenua. So do we provide any funding to help iwi or hapu talk to us?
Tracy.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for that question. So with respect to the staffing complement of the team, it continues to be a challenge. And as explained on Monday afternoon, previously we've had 6 vacancies. We're now down to 2 in the team. Those people who have joined us are not at the senior level, but they've shown a willingness, and so we are bringing them on at a junior level, and we'll wrap the support around them. With respect to engagement with our hapu and iwi, it is a challenge not only for ourselves, but the entire sector. There is so much coming at hapu and iwi. We do provide funding that is built into the policy programs for that engagement. That funding takes the shape of either direct costs that we provide to iwi to engage, or to provide a facilitator or somebody who can do the work for iwi. We have and will consider to continue to have challenges in that space, but as I think I noted in the report, we've made the most traction, I guess, gained the most traction in the last 6 weeks of engagement. It's just maintaining that momentum and taking opportunities as they arise.
Cool. And just this again, this could be my complete ignorance because I don't understand, but on page 96, there's the RAG. And it talks about iwi. Is Ngā Tahuhi on that list?
So,
sorry, Tainui? Tainui or Waikato on the list?
So in respect to our iwi and hapu that we're required to consult with in the Waikato region, we've got about 37 entities. It's probably, well, it's acknowledged as the most complex iwi arrangements in the country. So we have, with respect to the coastal plan, it is Waikato Tainui, Hauraki iwi and Maniapoto. With respect to freshwater, it's the entire iwi from Lake Taupo, including Whanganui, to be fair, traversing up to our iwi of Tamaki Makaurau as well as all the Waikato iwi.
Okay.
Right. If there are no more questions, we have Andrew has moved the resolution. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Pamela. All those in favour say aye. Carried. Thank you. Moving on to item number 8, annual leave management, wellbeing and health and safety indicators. Neville.
Morena tātou. Normally Nick Ollington would have presented this section of the report to the committee, but as you'll be well and truly aware, he has left us and we're in the process of recruiting for his replacement. So as a director responsible for this area of the business, I'm in front of you today to present the report and answer any questions that you might have about the topics that are in front of you. And I've also am accompanied by 2 staff from the People and Capability Directorate. We've got Linda Stewart, who is our team leader in the health in the HR area, and we've got Marie Fullerton, who is our health and safety business partner. So if there's any quite deep technical questions, I'm sure that they can provide the clarity that you will be seeking. So look, I'll take the report as read and just highlight a couple of topics once I can find the right page it's on. Sorry about my page, 105, yeah, 102. Yeah, so sorry about that delay. So like I said, I'll take the report as being read and just highlight a couple of the key topics that the report contains. Annual leave management, we'll probably want to have a bit of a discussion about that. That's clearly going in a direction that we would prefer. It wasn't going up, but going down. So we have a bit of a discussion about that. We cover off some updates around the COVID-19 situation. As we're aware, it is starting to see some positive downturn in the community in general, and likewise within our organisation as well. The influenza regime that we've for vaccination has also been reasonably positive across the organisation. However, we are being impacted, as everybody is, by seasonal flus. But we've seen a reasonably steep drop-off in the number of cases of COVID being reported in recent weeks. The health and safety indicators around the critical risk reviews and so forth. This information has previously been reported to the last council meeting a week or two ago, so you are getting a bit of a late update. It is the same information, but I'm sure you'll have questions around that stuff. Also, the Employee Assistance Program and the utilisation of that program, noting that it's obviously highly confidential in nature, so the information that you're being provided with today is at a high level, but is indicative of how our staff are feeling and how they're in this type of circumstances in which they're reporting distress or anxiety. So that's the general overview. Just going back to the key topic, I assume will be a key topic will be the leave management scenario and what are we doing about it. As clearly stated in the report, the numbers have gone up across the board, particularly in the cohort with leave balances above 240 hours. Future leave bookings are reflected in the appendice at the back of this report and give you a bit of a guide of what's going on in that respect. But just noting that those were a snapshot in time at the time of compiling the report, and more leave will have been booked since then. Now, without labouring too much the causal factors as to why the leave has grown to the degree it has, there's a whole lot of information that we can give you around that if you require it. It's what are we doing about it that is the key issue, isn't it? And so as an executive team, we have debated and discussed this at great length. And as recently as yesterday, it was a topic at our ELT agenda. It's also part of a dashboard that ELT get on a daily basis, which shows where leave accruals are, leave balances by directorate and in totality for the organisation. So directors are charged with the immediate responsibility for managing the leave balances within their directorate. So all staff with leave balances over the maximum threshold, of 240 hours will be expected to have a comprehensive leave plan in place, discussed and negotiated with their direct line manager and reported and signed off by their director. Our goal is to get leave balances down to or under 240 hours within the next 12 months. Now, we note that this is a significant issue, and when it arises, it's one that's compounded on a monthly basis by an average of 1.8 days, accrual per month. So it's not a static, it's a very dynamic scenario. As months trickle by and days accrue, and we've already got high outstanding leave accruals for individuals, it has a direct and material impact on those staff that are within range who do have leave booked and planned, but they cannot take it sometimes because of those people with the outstanding balances who are taking up all of that opportunity. So it's in everyone's best interest to get this under control. We do also recognise that the legislation provides for a trade-off on an annual basis of 5 days annual leave, so just cash up that leave for people who meet the criteria. We're quite diligent on that one, and we do have controls around accessing that leave opportunity or that cash up opportunity. That is that you've also got to have taken some leave in that 2-month period preceding the time in which you wish to cash it in. So we are focused on, we understand some of the tools we've got available to us above and beyond just forcing staff or requiring staff to take leave. But it is a deliberate focus that we're taking. It is one that executives have to hold responsibility for and be accountable to the chief executive accordingly. And plans that reflect the requirement to get those hours down need to be in place and visible if required for the chief executive. So I guess that's our key strategy. And And I believe a year is a reasonable time frame given the type of challenge we're working with. So I haven't gone into the rationale and the reasons why the leave is accrued. I think you can make your own assumptions about that given the historical path we've been on over the last couple of years. But I think what we're doing about it is most important. So happy to take questions on that topic or any other topic for that matter.
Thank you, Neville. Do the committee, oh, yes, Barry.
Yep, first one up. Thank you for commenting. You said that the target is 240. If we look at the blue line on page 103, what I'm trying to ascertain is that shows a number of staff that move up and down on that blue light or that blue line that's got the 240. So is there a target in terms of number of staff on the 240? So that's my first question. I've got some other questions. In other words, I want to find out what are we aiming for? Presumably, if you could still have that graph going up if 240 was the general view, because you could have more people at the 240 level. So I just want to understand your target. That's the first question I've got.
I'll respond to that now if you wish. So it would ultimately be zero. So we'd be seeking that no staff have a balance above 240 hours. It'd have to be an extreme and exceptional circumstance for that. So right now, obviously, we've got a number who are at 240 or above, and that's our focus group.
Right.
So ultimately, in 12 months, no staff above 240 hours would be our goal.
Thank you. That's answered one of my second questions, which was how long. You've said 12 months is to aim to get to that. And so therefore, while there might be a bit up and down, you'll expect that trend graph to be dropping now instead of increasing. So thank you very much for that. The next question I have is, do the staff, it says in this report there are currently 61 staff in total on the monitoring list. Do those 61 staff know they're on a monitoring list? That's first thing. And second thing, what is the monitoring list in terms of, what are we talking about? Is it just that there's, what are they being subjected to? I just want to understand that, and do the staff know what that means?
So no, very good questions in regard to do the staff know? My expectation and the Chief Executive expectation would be yes. And that would be through the plans that are being negotiated between their team leader or their manager that are reported to the director to say, this is your balance. We need to forecast when you're going to take that leave, and recognising that it's accruing at that 1.8 days a month as well. So yes, they will know, and yes, it is being actively monitored. In terms of the 61 staff, and I'll just check this one with the team behind me, I believe the appendice or the attachment on page 107 gives that breakdown, but I haven't counted the numbers to say is it 61 or not, so I'd need to.
So through you, Mr. Chair, if I can clarify, so the annual leave taken in blocks is around staff and key roles where they are handling budgets or financial type transactions. So it is a fraud risk control that people are stepping away from their role for a solid 2 weeks at least. And the assumption that someone else will be stepping in and doing that. So that incorporates a bunch of finance staff, most managers, some team leaders in that group.
And the team have just confirmed that the lists on 107, 108 are the breakdown.
Kia ora. Just a question around any correlation of increase, or I should say, inability to take leave because of the retention and attraction of staff issue. Are some of these balances tied to that that either people are choosing to take opportunities elsewhere, or we're not able to fill those roles, and so people are like, I know you'd love to go. We know you'd love to go on holiday, but sorry, we've got too much workload. Just wondering if we're looking at any correlation there.
Look, I couldn't answer that with a degree of scientific accuracy, but that is a good assumption in my view. As we've got areas of the organisation where turnover may be higher, then the probability that leave would be encouraged is lower. and also the staff members themselves, their own personal care for the work that they do and for their colleagues would probably affect their decision making on top of all the other impacts around booking or taking leave in a proactive fashion. So that's one of the conundrums and challenges that we'll have to work through, because the issue of staffing levels and a decline in numbers in some areas of the business still has to be managed alongside of the leave being taken. So that adds another layer of complexity, but obviously that's what we're here to manage.
Yeah. I just raise it because I think it's all well and good to have these targets, but if there's an underlying reason that's contributing, that's outside of just the just requiring managers to have these conversations, it's I just want us to make sure that we're cognizant of that. I want this committee to be sure that that we're aware of where those intersections are creating greater problems in certain areas as opposed to others, because I think it's a relevant point.
If I could just comment as well. Thanks, Councillor Story. It is that's one of many issues which sit in this, as the reasons why people's leave balances get high. And certainly the type of discussion we're having is, whilst that some might be carrying a lot of load while we carry vacancies and we look at our business models for actually how we conduct our business, as they become more critical, we can't afford them to fall over either. So it's even more critical for them to be able to take their leave. But it's quite complex as you start to work through it. So thank you for raising it. It's certainly an issue. Just while I can, certainly that we're getting monthly reporting through to ELT now. We're getting the indicators so we can try and see that trajectory and how it's going. It might be aspirational, as we talked about before, to get to zero, but I think that's real. We give people annual leave for a reason. It's not so they can accumulate it, it's so it can be taken, and it's there to relieve the pressures and stresses that are within the job. So it's certainly a focus for what we're doing, but thank you for raising that particular issue because it is real.
Andrew.
To Pamela's point, that might be an issue and there might be a correlation, but the way I approach this is if we ever have to have a conversation with a deceased staff member's family and it goes along these lines, well, we didn't force them to have annual leave because they didn't have enough people in their team to backfill them and they were too busy. Well, good luck with that conversation, because that's an ugly set of facts. So this is a really disturbing report. It's disturbing on so many levels. So let's just have a look at it. What you've said to us, Neville, is we're really, really busy. We're doing everything we can. Oh, but we're going backwards. Well, what I found in life is you're not measured by your inputs, you're measured by your outputs. And our output here is going backwards. So it's not working. My question of the Chief Executive, what are you doing about this personally? Because when I asked you this question about near miss reporting, you went and did some stuff with the staff that resulted in an immediate impact on near miss reporting, and full credit to you. I think this is a health and safety risk. And I think that having it as an issue for the Chief Executive to have in the front of your mind is really important, because you don't ever want to be in a position, and I've been in this position of being in a company where we've lost colleagues, and it's an awful, awful place to be, and we don't want to be there. And I looked at that when I came in, 6 o'clock this morning, I came in, 6:30 this morning, I came into this building. I saw bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young people in taking boats out of the building and wet weather gear and getting ready for a day's work. And I'm thinking to myself, we take a lot of risks in this business. And if some of those people are really tired because they haven't had annual leave, how are they going to, what are we going to say if there's an accident? So my question is, what's the Chief Executive doing about it? And when it says executive in this list, Neville, is that, what are they? Are they the people in the executive leadership team? Yeah. Okay, well, I make the same comment as I made last time. There's 3 of the leaders in this company in this list, and it's not good enough. It's just not good enough. And my question is, when was the last time in the last 12 months that you've said to a staff member, in 2 weeks' time, you won't be coming to work because you're entitled to do that, as I understand it, under the Holidays Act. When was the last time we said that? Have we ever said it?
You say that one.
So I can answer that one. Yes, absolutely, categorically. I said that only 2 weeks ago, and that staff member's currently on leave, and they do have an accrual that is, but puts them on this list that's in front of you. So that's a direct report to me. But I've got others that I've got similar conversations with who are yet to take their leave. So that's just my experience, but I think that it's being replicated across the organisation. So that's in direct response to that particular question.
If I could just respond through, Mr. Chair. You did make some of these comments last month, and you might like to ask some of my executive about my position on it. I've made it very, very clear, what we're going to do about the annual leave for some of the very reasons that you raise. In terms of the executive on this list, I can tell you that I know 2 of them have leave booked, and it will be down below 200 hours in the not too distant future. Not too sure about the third one, where that gets us to, but it will be significantly lower than what it is now. So I just want to give an assurance that the exec aren't off the hook on this in terms of their own annual leave. They're absolutely on the hook on it. And, I'd invite you to ask any of the ones in this room, what I've been saying. I've made it very, very clear that I want this down. It's not acceptable. It has turned back up. There might be all sorts of good reasons for it, but we do need to get it down. And yes, we will take the action we need if that's the only way we can get staff to take it. But I am mindful at the same time, we've got a business to run, and every situation on here is different, and it's really hard to generalise each one. And I know everybody understands it, but it's a reminder. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, to Pamela's point about backfilling positions or our inability to backfill a position so that people can actually take annual leave. How much does that factor into, if we go right down this organisation, how much does that factor into the way we manage our staff? At what point do leaders told you have to backfill that position somehow, even if you have to get a contractor, because that person is sitting on over 240 hours of accrued annual leave? Do you have those sort of conversations from a health and safety point of view? Or
They're absolutely relevant points to raise, and thank you to both councillors for doing so. The tension is always between, we've got a job of significant size to undertake with potentially specialist staff who the only ones have the knowledge and the skill set to perform the task. Obviously the efficiency approach needs to be taken into consideration. Can we do this simpler, easier? Can we grow capability across the organisation, which takes time? Can we bring in contractors? Do we have sufficient contractors in the market available who have the skill sets required to be able to undertake the activity that or the other option is we defer the activity. So all those things need to be considered on balance and the right measure applied appropriately. We're doing some stuff internally in respect to distributing capability across the organisation. These are just really efficiency measures and processes. It won't be the answer to all of our issues in terms of where we lack capability and capacity in some critical specialist parts of the organisation, but it will help. And certainly upskilling staff in parallel where possible to enable them to provide that support at least at a low or intermediate level. For those roles where staff are required to take leave is also an appropriate response. Chris is very big on a one-team approach. So how do we work collectively in a less siloed fashion to enable people to consider taking on work that they might not have previously? Again, they're all parts of a complex puzzle, not one solution fits all. In the past, we might have just looked out to external contractors, but the market is tight. So not just from a recruitment and labour market perspective, but also from a contractor perspective. But putting all that to one side, at the end of the day, leave is for all the reasons we've talked about, is an absolute priority. So in some cases, we might have to delay and extend programs. Might mean that we miss critical deadlines in some areas. That's our job to understand where and when that would occur. And the key driver, our wellbeing and health and safety of our staff being paramount.
Barry.
Yes.
Sorry.
On a different front, a different reflection, I look a little deeper as to what some of these things mean. And one of the tools that we have is EAP, which is on page 106. Some things there really are big highlights, and I look for the big differences. So, for example, on workload, it says that we are 40% of the usual problems that are around EAP. So what that's saying to me is that the workload is not hugely significant from an EAP point of view compared with other EAPs. But the one I want to point to, and we sort of know this, but it's really important, EAP is telling us that on career, we are double anybody else in terms of issues to do with career. That's that top line, where what it's saying is essentially we have to ensure that our staff have let's say, a program of looking at their career development. It's becoming that's screaming to me that career development needs to be addressed here in the organisation to retain staff, because we've talked about them being lost. So that's a big signal to me, but also I do take comfort in the fact that the workload is smaller than anybody else in terms of issues. So those were big signals. You can see some of the other things are pretty good, compared with other ones. So we're not sort of out of step when you look at the personal issues. But in terms of workload, we're doing okay, but it's the career issues that I think we've really got to get a bit more eloquent on dealing with that. So that's my insights, and thank you for the report.
Thank you.
If there are no more questions, can I have a mover and seconder for the resolution, please? Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Paul. All those in favour say aye. Carried. Thank you. We're due for a 10-minute break now, so if we can be back here at about 20 past, and we'll continue with the agenda. Thank you. Not at all.
It ends up at 20.
I was looking at
Historical issue, you know, I'm all about consistency, consistently being near the top of the list.
You've got 40 hours booked.
I had booked some Christmas holidays since then. Why not?
There's only half.
Yeah.
There's a lot of organisations having trouble doing the job because of constant.
Yeah, I know.
That's the big struggle that I've seen in Christian organisations. So one organisation, two that actually audit people, either auditors or the people who aren't available.
I know.
The program keeps breaking up, they're not making money. Quite tough.
Very
Let's have
tough.
that conversation later.
Right.
Not my choice.
Okay. Okay. We're back on flood protection assets condition currently. Greg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Morena, everyone. So yeah, this report has come about from, it was actually a discussion around the key project reference group and an interest in our asset base and the current condition of that flood protection and land drainage asset base. So this is actually a report that has come to the to this committee previously. So it is a regular one that we provide to give you an idea of our risk profile and the work that we're doing. So the report itself provides a summary of the work we've undertaken, the current status of our asset base across primarily the Lower Waikato, Waiho and Piako zones. And it also identifies some of the continuous improvement work that we've been doing to do a much better job in terms of understanding our asset condition. This is an annual process that we run through in terms of inspecting those assets. And a few years back, the long-term plan enabled the recruitment of a reliability engineer who has an electrical and mechanical background in particular. And so what that means is that we've been able to be a lot more diligent around our condition surveys. Our engineer has undertaken an initial assessment of all of our assets to re-establish our baseline and is now in the process of upskilling our other work supervisors and field staff to apply the same rigour that he does to understanding our asset conditions. As you can see, there is a lot of, I guess, early warning signs that have come through where defects have been picked up that need to be addressed in that sort of 5 to 10 year period. And the overall assessment is that our risk hasn't changed as a council and that all of this information will be contributing to both our operational work program and also our capital work program as we need to. So I'm happy to take the rest of the report as read, Mr. Chairman, and look forward to the discussion.
Right. Any questions? It is, isn't it?
I'm happy to second, but I have a question. Can you explain what poor or very poor is? I saw a photograph and you say it's not going to, it's under poor or very poor, but it's not going to fail, I think, in the next 5 to 10 years. So on one hand, it says it's poor or very poor. And the next hand, it says it's not going to fail for 5 to 10 years. So is it a cosmetic looking poor or very poor? I want to understand what that means, because when you're assessing risk and you see something that says that 13% of your assets are poor or very poor, you go, well, we've got a problem here. And then you're told in the next line that it's not going to fail in the next 5 to 10 years.
It really comes down to the kind of defect that's been picked up by that grading. So for some defects that are in that category, they may require a much more sooner work to address them. It's really assessed on a site-by-site basis, and our programs are also then prioritised to address those defects that require that work to happen now, as opposed to ones that may need to be programmed, sort of whether it's 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, 10 years out.
So follow up, if I may, through the chair. If they are therefore this, that's what I almost expected to hear. So is the Finance Committee going to get a request for a much higher commitment to maintenance and repair now that you've identified 13%? In other words, is this going to have budgetary implications going forward?
Yes, so at the moment, there's no signal that I've received that our funding, well, our budgets are insufficient to do the work that we need to. Obviously, we are always prioritising our work to address those particularly high-risk areas. And I think the report has noted also that we're somewhat constrained at the moment around labour, materials, lead-in time, that kind of thing.
Right, so
But in saying that, we do have an LTP coming up,
yes.
and we'll be fully reviewing our work programs there to make sure that we continue to meet that level of service, both operationally and capital, and from a capital point of view. From a capital specific point of view, so those are for the larger, I guess, defect items that require capital investment. We have happily lived within the envelope that council has set us over the last few years. Obviously, we have quite a bit of inflationary pressure
Yes.
coming at us, so again, we'll be reviewing those. We do review them annually, but we'll be doing that in a much more rigorous way in preparation for the long-term plan.
Yeah, Chair, I was just aware of this massive bow wave of logistics, inflation, lack of thing that's already in every other area, building, construction, showing a massive increase in inflation, well beyond the 7%. So I was trying to get a little bit of a handle as to whether this area of work was going to be pushing. It sounds to me the LTB's coming up and that's the door. So it sounds to me as though there's a bit of a warning sign there. That's all I suggest, Chair. Thank you.
Greg, page 110, point 17. Why is it that there are no stop banks in poor condition on council managed land, and yet there are 7.7 kilometres of poor condition stop banks on private land, when the council has got very, what's the word, good quality powers of entry and doing any work that, why have we got this situation where there's so many poor quality stop banks on private land?
Yeah, and thanks for raising that. This is actually a live discussion that we're having at the moment as a team as to how we particularly manage our assets on private land. They are in a different situation to those on council land. On council land, we have control. We license those areas for grazing. We have very strict conditions around how that use occurs. We are undertaking regular inspections to make sure those licensees are fulfilling those requirements. On private land, there aren't those agreements because those assets are located on private land.
Yeah, but your powers are still,
Yep.
the same. You can do anything that's needed to maintain flood protection standards.
Yes, and so it's more about the defects happening rather than us getting access to undertake the repair work themselves. And so I said it is a live question about how we actually do manage that. There are a few instruments available to council. Other councils do use them. An example would be a bylaw, but we need to understand what our options are and what the best way moving forward is. I mean, I think it's fair to say that landowners do want to do the best for their stop banks and other assets because they do rely on them for the productivity of their land. But unfortunately, there are some examples where those stop banks are, for example, grazed inappropriately during inappropriate times or with animals that aren't appropriate for the season, where we have to come in and undertake some remedial work.
You said there won't be any further deterioration, but what are you doing to improve the situation? Because I would think that amount of poor condition stop banks is a concern.
Yep, and so this information all feeds into our capital planning program that we do every year. We do have a starting point, but every year we rescope and reevaluate that program. And in fact, right throughout the year, we reevaluate that program to make sure that the work that is necessary is going into those particular areas. And so that's, I guess, the ongoing cycle of capital planning and delivery that we have to address those defects that are being identified.
Okay. Good report.
But my words are a little bit different from yours. Your capital asset management plans hold issues with the run rate, which was your risk management, it's all risk management, understand how it works.
Yeah, from a risk-based point of view, we are able to address those areas that our teams are identifying as requiring the work to occur. But I think what we have identified in a couple of areas that we have had to reprioritise that program to really focus on that area, on the high-risk areas. It is an area that's top of my mind at the moment, particularly around, we've talked about staff recruitment, staff availability and material availability earlier in this discussion. And so that's something that's particularly mindful for me. The other thing is we've also talked about workloads and making sure that we are prioritising our workloads accordingly so that, again, we have our staff that are able to take their leave appropriately and are happy in what they're doing. Our operational teams are in an interesting, unique position for council in that there's quite strong private sector demand for our teams and quite high wage inflationary pressures as well, which we're having to face at the moment, particularly in the agricultural sector. So it's one that we are navigating on a number of fronts at the moment.
What I've seen in some other, what I've seen in some other capital sectors is that people are sort of recognising supply chain challenges at build inventories. So is that something that works for you, or is it not the type of materials you can sort of?
Oh, it can do. And we do have a recent example where a tendering process identified a long lead time for some materials that are required for that project, meaning that we wouldn't be able to deliver that project within the required timeframe. So based on the purely leaving it to a tenderer to undertake that work. So we've recently undertaken to pre-purchase materials to make sure they're available. We also do have an inventory in our various depots around the region for some key pieces of stock that might be required under emergency conditions, things like culvert pipes, flap gates, that kind of thing, all on the judgment of those operational teams as to what comes up and what we can wait for versus what we can't wait for.
And finally, I've been sitting up in Tāmaki ever since our last meeting in June, watching the weather around the country and indeed in our own region, and wondering about the mighty Waikato and how you've held up, because there's been very inclement weather hit in New Zealand, and I haven't read any bad reports. So I presume everything's gone well, or you've had a dry spell or something. But how's the system held up against this season, a winter season of very bad weather?
Yeah, very well compared to other parts of the country. I mean, we certainly haven't had the rainfall that they've seen in Nelson or Taranaki. We did have a period probably a month ago when we did have successive rainfall events coming through in the Waikato, which led to bringing the Waikato River up, and we actually did initiate an incident management team to really understand that the what if we did need to get further events coming through. Luckily that didn't come to pass, but certainly if you're driving between here and Auckland now, you'll see that the Waikato River is still holding up, and just by the nature of that river, it takes a while. It's draining the entire catchment from Lake Taupo back, so it will take a while to come back. And so what we're seeing is some peripheral ponding as well. You see that as well off the expressway, some areas that have ponding because the river's holding up high. But yep, overall, I think that we've had a few weeks of much more settled weather recently.
So when you're doing your asset management planning, you're going to think about what happened if Nelson was the Waikato?
Yeah, well, we do have our flood management plans already in place. So we have a zone-based system of undertaking flood management and then escalating that to a region-wide approach. That was last probably tested mostly, it's probably in 2017, I think, when the Hauraki Plains had quite a significant flood. But yeah, those plans are all in place. And we actually also have an emergency management framework in place, which we're speaking to the Integrated Catchment Management Committee about next week, which provides that more cross-organisational preparedness for responding to those kind of things.
So you're kind of feeling confident you got the plans?
Absolutely. I would note also that we work very closely with the hydro dam operators in the Waikato River, and there's a long-established high flow management plan to work with Mercury and Genesis Energy to manage those situations.
David, do you want to say something?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I had similar questions. The one that I still would like to ask is on paragraph 19. As part of the long-term plan, we looked at condition assessments and maintenance plans particularly around the stop banks. And on 19, I see that you're looking at understanding the landowners and council's responsibilities. I thought that had been done so that you could in fact complete your maintenance plan. So my question is, has something changed?
Our responsibilities are very clear in terms of maintaining and operating and renewing those particular assets. It's more about what we can bring to the table in terms of agreements or provisions that are put in place to manage the use of that land on private land. So in other words, ensuring that landowners do what they're supposed to do to help with the condition, maintain the condition of those assets. Does that make sense?
Partly because I thought what I think Paul raised earlier was that, Graham raised earlier was that you had full access. You've got,
yes,
powers supporting you to do that.
Yes.
So, understanding those responsibilities, kind of like what's changed. I mean, as long as from a risk point of view, long as something hasn't changed and we're now disadvantaged, increasing the risk on being able to get to and carry out your maintenance. Nothing's changed.
Nothing's changed there. It's more about how we work with our landowners who have assets on private land.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we've already got a mover and a seconder. So all those in favour? Carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 10, the LTP amendment. Janine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is really just presenting for the committee the management report in relation to the amendment to Council's long-term plan following the special consultative process that we undertook for public transport services in the Hauraki Coromandel area. So as is noted, consultation document had received an emphasis of matter opinion around the certainty of waka kotahi funding in relation to proposed new services in that community, or those communities, with Council's final decision that said we weren't going to proceed with those because there was no waka kotahi funding. That emphasis of matter was removed from the final opinion. So reports there as a matter of course for the committee's information. Obviously David and Nodia are here if there's anything to raise, or I guess anything more generally from an Audit New Zealand relationship perspective.
Thank you. Any questions from? No? Can I have a mover and seconder? Paul, thank you. Andrew, all those in favour say aye. Carried. Thank you. Item 11, accounting estimates and judgments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is really an update on the report that was provided to the committee at its last meeting, with just final adjustments made through a number of matters. Probably the significant area is obviously in relation to infrastructure assets and the assessment of potential movement given the inflationary pressures that are being seen in terms of current contract prices. We have been working with the valuer to get an estimate based on actual contract works and the nature of the assets that we hold. We haven't had finalised advice on that. We're expecting that this week, but the indication is that we would see about a 7% movement across our asset values since we last underwent a full revaluation. Based on the value of those, we think that sits beneath the materiality limits as have been stipulated within our audit plan from Audit New Zealand. So I don't believe that there's a trigger there around the need for a full revaluation, but that's obviously an area we're keen to get confirmed and across the line with the audit team sooner rather than later.
So David, are you comfortable with that position?
The first time I read the 7%, we calculated the materiality with valued assets. So I can't give a yes or no because I haven't done it the first time I've actually checked this.
Okay.
But Janine's right, at 7%, it doesn't
raise an alarm bell.
Right.
If we were sitting up at 9%,
Yeah.
9.5%, I would,
Yeah. So as soon as we have that information, we can share that with the audit team. If there's any advice that they're able to give ahead of the final audit, then that's obviously appreciated.
You need to close that off.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a significant assumption.
as soon as possible, I think we need that resolved. Yep.
The other valuations, I guess, from an employee entitlement and also our interest rate derivative valuations have obviously moved since we last reported, just with the ongoing increases in the underlying inflation rates and those flowing through to discount assumptions and the like. So they are reflected there. I think from a derivative perspective, previously we'd reported a valuation of just over $500,000, and that's now swung up to about 1.1 million at the end of the financial year. And then in terms of the accounting standards issued but not yet effective, there's just an additional one that's been noted there in terms of PBE IFRS 17 around insurance contracts. Happy to take any other questions, Mr. Chair.
Any questions?
Do we imagine we'll have any difficulty next year with PB FRS 48? It says we haven't addressed it yet, but will we need comparatives for next year? And I mean, is there any, have we thought about it? I guess we have.
I guess we already have a bunch of service performance reporting within our documents anyway, from a public sector perspective. So haven't done any further work than that on it. So it will be determining whether that existing framework and reporting we have is fit for purpose around the accounting standard.
Right. If there are no more questions, can I have a mover and seconder for the... Thank you. All those in favour? Carried. Thank you very much. Item 12, elected members' gifts. Janine,
Yeah,
is
thank
this
you,
you
Mr.
again?
Chair. So this is the reporting back to the committee around the disclosures that have been made by both elected members and staff around both gifts received, but also from staff around their annual conflict of interest declaration. And where those have been noted, how those are proposed to be managed. Noting that through each procurement process, particularly if we're going through an open market approach, there is a conflict of interest process to check in each circumstances as they arise. So these are the committee's information.
Any questions? I'm always delighted to see some being declined because they have to record it as well. So, no, I'm fine. Can we have a mover and seconder for the resolution, please? Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Paul. All those in favour say aye. Carried. Thank you. Item 13, policy review schedule. Janine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So 2 policies presented here that have been reviewed in this period. So the contract management policy with track changes showing there, reasonably minor changes, but just reflecting changes in responsibilities, role titles, and some additional provisions there in terms of expectations of contract managers. And then also the fraud policy having been updated. Key changes there reflecting the new legislation around Protected Disclosures Whistleblower Act to make sure that we're consistent with that, that the policy reflects advice from the Office of the Auditor General and also, I think helpfully, a schedule of sort of roles and responsibilities for the different participants within our fraud risk management framework.
Any questions from committee members?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Sorry, I've lost the page. That you crossed out the bit where you could have an electronic books, page 140, paragraph 15. You've crossed out electronic versions. Is that somewhere else, or have I misunderstood that, or is everything in paper now?
Sorry, which one?
Paragraph 15, yeah. All electronic versions sort of has vanished. So does that imply that everything's signed on a bit of ink? I missed something.
Yes. Just seeing if I've got someone from the team in the back who can answer that. Certainly, I mean, our contract management system is an electronic document management system. So, yeah, that might have just been an inadvertent deletion in there. We can check that to make sure that that reflects actual process, which will be electronic form.
Perhaps it's not PDF anymore. Perhaps you use the sign for it or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wondered whether the fact that you use an electronic system just covered everything now.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly everything will be stored electronically.
Okay. I had a question on page 139, para 7 in the bullet points. What's SHE?
So that is the health and safety verification system that is used or provided that's used. So the pre-qualification process.
And under the fraud policy, with the changes that have been made to the protected disclosures legislation, I think we'll have to look at somehow testing that that system does work. If we're going to place reliance on that, so I think we do need to bring that up early in the new triennium to make sure, because the number of disclosures under this is very low, so we need to test. If we're going to rely on it working, we need to positively test that it does work.
An internally sourced internal.
Well, I just think an internal audit.
Internally sourced internal audit.
Yes,
Trial.
just something.
Just,
I
yeah,
think it's
a
important that
blind
we
test.
know, this committee knows that it does work. And I would expect we don't have many uses being made of those disclosures in normal course of business.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a small matter, peculiar interest to me only probably, where in a past life I was contract advisor. I was had drummed into me by some lawyers that the use of the word will was not acceptable and you should always put shall. So I just want to ask our auditors whether they differentiate between a factor which says somebody will do something and somebody, or should it be always shall? So is that of any moment, or is it just irrelevant? Thanks.
I'm not a lawyer.
That's all I want to know.
Gee, I'm
Little man.
not a lawyer. Will says it will be done. Will equates to must, equates plus minus to shall, maybe becomes very different. So no, I don't distinguish particularly between will and shall.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Barry. All those in favour, say aye. Carried. Thank you. That brings us to the end of the open agenda. So we need a resolution to move into public excluded, which is, thank you, Paul. I'll second that. All those in favour, say aye. Against? Are you? Yep. Do you want your vote recorded? Okay.